5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX podcast episode number 61. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I'm here today with you because we need to shake things up in the world of HR, talent acquisition, and company culture in order to create positive employee experiences in our organizations. Your workplace doesn't have to be a dreadful place where employees feel disengaged. This podcast brings a different lens to the HR, employee engagement, and company culture conversation. We approach these topics from a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional HR perspective. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to share best practices on the key elements that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create these positive employee experiences. Not every company can do what Airbnb or Google do around their employee experience, and this is what this show is all about. Sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is Rachel Druckenmiller, Director of Wellbeing at SIG. Today, with Rachel, we talk about what are the common misconceptions about wellness? Why most wellness initiatives fail? How HR executives must place wellness and well-being at the center of their people strategy? Which metrics should organizations put in place to measure the success of their wellness strategy? And finally, some examples of companies that have successfully implemented wellness programs. This episode is brought to you by Spring International. Spring is a woman-owned boutique firm that focuses on performance-based employee engagement and people analytics. From onboarding to exit, Spring uses proven techniques to help companies improve the employee experience and calculate the ROI of HR programs and initiatives. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Rachel. And because it takes a good amount of time to produce this podcast, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube, as it will help promote the content. If you want me to speak at your next event, get some advice on your EX initiatives, or send me feedback and suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX podcast. Very excited for today's guest, Rachel Druckenmiller. Rachel is calling from Baltimore and she is the Director of Wellbeing at SIG, and she was also named by the Wellness Council of America as the #1 wellness professional in the US in 2015 and among the top 10 in 2017. That's pretty impressive.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited. I think this is going to be a great conversation that'll hopefully help a lot of people.
First, easy question for you. Who are you and what is SIG?
Okay. So first of all, I live in Baltimore, Maryland, and I've always had an interest in health. And I thought I wanted to be like a doctor or nutritionist when I grew up, when I was in high school. And so kind of as a result of my own, I guess, personal transformational health journey that involved everything from malnourishment to body image issues to like reproductive health woes and even getting mono last year, I just really developed a heart for people who are hurting and people who are in pain. And I know what it's like to be sick, and I know what it's like to come out on the other side feeling better and more alive. So I grew up in kind of an unconventional environment in that both of my parents are entrepreneurs, and I saw them love their work. I never saw them hate work. I never saw that it was a drag. I saw that they had a ton of autonomy and purpose with what they did and had their own businesses. And so that really inspired me to realize that I could do work that I loved. So my background combines kind of a mix of health and psychology. So I studied psychology in undergrad and got a master's degree in health science. And I'm also an integrative nutrition health coach, trained in culinary nutrition, and I'm also trained as a thriving workplace culture consultant. So I've kind of taken all of the things I'm passionate about and combined them into what I do now. And I've been in the wellness field for about 12 years and kind of made up my position about 12 years ago at the same company at SIG and have, had it morph into what it is today. And so to speak of that, I guess SIG it's a company where I work, and I've been there since I was an intern, actually, starting in 2003. So I'm proof of what. Yeah, if you take good care of your interns, they might stick around. So watch out. So that's what happened. Give them freedom, let them do what they want, and make them feel cared for. So we are an innovative benefits consulting firm, and we focus heavily on a couple of different things. We focus on strategic consulting, data analytics, compliance, which has been a growing issue in our industry, and culture and well-being. And so kind of what our goal is, actually our CEO's motto is, if you take care of Baltimore, Baltimore will take care of you. And so kind of behind that, I'd say the driver behind that is that we become extensions of our clients' human resources teams. And we've also been recognized multiple times regionally and nationally as a best place to work. So as I said, we're based in Baltimore, and we're part of a larger entity actually called the Alera Group, which has about 1,000 employees and about 50 offices across the country. So like I said, I've been with SIG my whole career and, expanding into that role within Alera. And my time, I'd say, is split between consulting with employers to kind of help them do what we've done and become employers of choice. I do a lot of speaking, so I lead workshops for employees. I speak to leadership teams, management teams, and at conferences across the country. And I also am a writer, and I write a blog called Rachel's Nourish Kitchen. So kind of do a bunch of different things, but I really love what I do.
Awesome. There's a ton of research out there singing the cost and the benefits, praises of workplace health and wellness programs. And even statistics points to links between recruitment and retention, absenteeism, employee engagement, productivity, and how it pays to keep people healthy. Mm-hmm. But what is workplace wellness exactly, and what are some of these misconceptions people may have on the topic?
So I think this is a great question, because one of the things that's often not done is kind of like this idea of, operationalizing terms. Like, we talk about this thing a lot, but very few people actually say what it is. So I'm glad that you asked this question, because we have to start there.
Yes.
And so I think, to your point, workplace wellness, it tends to be defined by different people in different ways. So let's say for some people, it means we offer biometric screenings, like for cholesterol and blood pressure and glucose and flu shots, and we have newsletters. And to others, it might mean chair massages, fitness challenges, healthy snacks in the break room. And then if you were to actually ask employees, I'd say of a lot of companies what workplace wellness is, they might say something like, it's the stuff I have to do to get money funded into my health savings account or to get an insurance premium discount.
Yeah.
So, right there, you have people that are disagreeing about what it is. And most companies' approaches to wellness focus on clinical risk factors and just modifying what can be done on the surface, like, making sure everybody has access to Apples and Fitbits. And that, unfortunately, has really limited what wellness can be. So we choose to align our definition of wellness with Gallup's model, and that takes into account kind of the integration among 5 different aspects of who we are as human beings. And they use the word well-being. So that looks at career, social, financial, physical, and community well-being. And it's a more holistic approach.
Yes.
And it kind of takes the whole person into account instead of just saying you are your physical body. And it's so interesting. I read a lot. I've always been a reader. And Tom Emmerich, who's the head of Edison Healthcare and who worked with Walmart for years, he said something like, most wellness programs are kind of an apology for the way we've done work. And, we're trying to control and monitor and, overwork people and underappreciate them. And then we're shocked when they turn to things like smoking, drinking, and overeating to cope. And we blame them instead of saying, well, what is the system doing that should be done differently? And even things like the opioid crisis, I think, are affected by this. So my friend and colleague, Mim Senft, she's a pretty outspoken warrior for the need to address the whole person based on the opioid crisis. We think of like physical pain is often rooted in psychological pain and stress, and that can trigger the need for, pain management medications, which are then abused. And so I think really kind of coming down to it, we need to fundamentally change the way we do work and the way we look out for people if we're really going to see change.
And what I like in the Gallup's definition of wellness is every aspect of our life is intertwined, whether it's,
yes.
We talk about finances, we talk about going to work, we talk about, the family environment, whatever it might be, it's all intertwined, and we just can't compartmentalize those different aspects of life. And I would say maybe that's one of the mistakes companies do, is that they try to focus solely on what's happening during work hours, right?
Yes.
Not so much about what's happening outside of work.
Yes, as if there's a different person, right? The person who shows up from 9 to 5 is a fundamentally different person who goes home at night and takes care of their kids, or, is dealing with an aging parent. Like, no, to your point, you're exactly right. They're the same person, and we have to recognize that we have to pay attention to the whole person and how they interact with their entire day, not just when they're with us. Yes, absolutely.
So why should company executives consider implementing a wellness program in their organization? And the second question would be, what are some of the major challenges companies face when implementing such programs?
So I like to look at some of the research by Quantum Workplace, which is the engine behind the best places to work surveys. So, if organizations have taken one of those surveys to be recognized as the best place to work, Quantum Workplace probably has their data. And a few years ago, they published some data, and they found that when employees feel like their employer cares about their health and well-being, they are 38% more likely to be engaged. They're 10 times less likely to be hostile. And I think most people could agree they would like fewer hostile people at work. They're 17% more likely to still be working there in 1 year. So that's a matter of retention. They're 28% more likely to recommend their workplace. And so that's looking at recruitment, and internal referrals, which is very important.
It is.
And then they're 18% more likely to go the extra mile for the organization. And that's a matter of performance. So, if we really look at this, engagement, performance, and well-being are all inextricably linked. And unfortunately, a lot of the times we're missing this. We're missing this connection. Pardon me. We're missing this connection between all of these things. So I think, on top of that, your question about, wellness being a program, I think it brings up the point that I think it brings up is that, workplace wellness, I don't really see it as a program. And the reason for that is programs start and stop. Programs can be cut from funding. They tend to appeal to some people and not others. They don't necessarily take the whole system into account. And, for companies who are most successful with wellness or well-being or whatever you want to call it, it's embedded into the fabric of the business. It's not a silo in HR. It really, again, looks at that whole person commitment from leadership that's seen throughout the organization. And yeah. So
on that topic, should wellness be a perk or a benefit? And meaning that perks usually are transient, while benefits are more sustainable and long-term.
So that's a really good question. I was actually reading an article recently that asked that very question. And I think if I had to think of it, I'd say it should be neither. I think it should be a strategy because I think if it's a benefits can be cut too. perks can be cut, benefits can be cut, but if it's just a core part of if you say as an organization, this is just how we do business. We care about people and we take care of people. This is part of our core values as an organization, is when people are here, when they are in our care. There's a guy named Bob Chapman, who's the CEO of Barry Waymiller, which is a really amazing organization that I actually just spent 2 days at their Leadership Institute this week in one of their trainings. And, he says each person who works for you, is someone's precious child. And what would it look like? They're someone's, son or daughter or partner or cousin or aunt or uncle. And if we were to actually treat people like people and not as positions or as the function of what they do, I feel like so much of this conversation around wellness, we wouldn't have to have programs. We would just do what's right.
So what would you recommend for an HR leader or even an executive who's considering starting a wellness initiative and take wellness as a part of a retention strategy or an employee engagement strategy? What are the first things that someone would need to consider?
So I think a couple things. One of the things that's most helpful is to get a sense of casting a vision. Like, why are you doing this? Like, truly, because historically, a lot of the reason that employers have put in place wellness programs is to reduce healthcare costs, to generate a return on investment. And as long as that is the motivation, employees know that, and employees know they're being manipulated. But if instead we ask a question of, our CEO, for instance, recently, our CEO, Richard, asked a question at an all-hands meeting recently, and he just said, what's something we could do to improve your life or make it better in some way? Simple question. People got together in small groups of 3 people and talked about it. And everything that, emerged from that were conversations like, help managing technology with my kids, my finances, having some sense of work-life balance and getting support and guidance about how to disconnect. It covered a variety of different topics, organizing, home organizing, that type of stuff. And I think organizations just are not asking fundamental questions about what their people need, first of all. And so I think just getting curious instead of making assumptions. I think the simplicity is important because, sometimes organizations say, in order to have a wellness program, we have to hire a vendor, pay them $100,000. We have to, brand our initiative. We have to get a representative from every location. And I think to start, what's most helpful is to just sit around with a group of employees and find out, what are their pain points? What would make their life easier? What would make them more excited to come to work? And what can you do to better support them to grow and learn and feel connected? Like, can we just have some initial conversations about something like that? Most organizations are not doing that.
And that's a very interesting point because oftentimes, as you said, the wellness programs are mostly put in place for to reduce healthcare costs.
Yes.
Right. And it's just, okay, so you need to walk 7,000 steps a day, and then you're going to check to get a smiley face or whatever it is, or 1 point or 10 points, and you need to exercise maybe two times a week, and then you're going to get these extra points, and then at the end of the year, if you meet a a certain number of points, and then you get a discount on your insurance premium for the next year.
Yes.
But it doesn't change really how people relate to their own wellness and how it ties back to their performance at work either. It's just something that is very tactical, but it's not long-term sustainable, I would say. Yes, amen. Yes, exactly what you just said. And it's not sustainable. It is, and the key word you said there is tactical. It is often tactical and not strategic. And as long as it is tactical, it will be a box to check by HR, by leadership, and by employees. But when it becomes strategic, I think one way in particular to make this strategic is to tie in something we haven't chatted about much, but this career aspect of well-being. Because you mentioned, to your point, physical well-being is often what's focused on.
and it makes us have a very narrow focus. And in actually a friend and colleague of mine, Rex Miller, he who I know you're very familiar with, and his recent book, The Healthy Workplace Nudge, I love what he says, that we have, this is not a crisis of wellness necessarily. It's a crisis of leadership, of leaders who genuinely care. And I like to pull in some research from Gallup on that. So they found that career well-being has the greatest impact on employee well-being, and that when employees have high levels of career well-being or a sense of purpose and growth at work, they're twice as likely to be thriving in all of those other 4 areas. And the piece that gets left out of the conversation almost every time is the role of the manager on well-being. This is not to blame managers. It's just to say they have tremendous potential for impact. And oftentimes, people spend way more time with their managers than they do with their doctors. And Gallup has found in some of their research that employees whose managers ignore them, these employees are 40% more likely to be actively disengaged or basically totally checked out of and sabotaging their work than someone whose manager focuses on their strengths. And people who are ignored are twice as likely to develop depression in the next 12 months.
That is very interesting, because it goes back to what we just discussed about, having very tactical programs in place. Again, whether it's you have to walk that certain distance every day, or you need to make that number of steps every day, or you need to exercise that number of times every week, or whatever. But everything around the environment of the employees not changing either, all those very tactical aspects of a wellness program don't mean anything and don't really have impact, because they may be active physically, but if they're being pressured by their manager, or their manager is mean to them, emotionally, it's going to impact their well-being as well.
100%. It absolutely. Well, actually, you know what? Okay, so this is so perfect the way you're asking these questions, because what they found, to take that one step further with the managers and engagement, Gallup found that when employee engagement increases, so when people are dialed into work, levels of, this was a correlational study, of course not causation, but levels of their cholesterol and triglycerides decrease. And when their engagement scores drop, their levels of triglycerides and cholesterol increase. So, it's just crazy to think about how impactful. You start with managers accounting for 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores. What are we doing to support managers? Because most managers are not trained to effectively manage, communicate with, support, guide, mentor, coach the employees that are in their care. And if we don't start with that, if we don't start to build trust there, if we don't start to equip them properly, we're going to have to keep putting these Band-Aids on what's happening, or we're going to have to keep having these quick fix solutions to get people to be well, and we're going to neglect the very thing. There's so many factors, right? Family can affect, obviously, but we're talking about work. And most people have a manager, and if their manager is not equipped or trained or supported to support themselves and the people they manage effectively, we're going to keep having these same issues over and over again.
Right. Yeah, that's really what the definition of a manager is. It's just to manage people. It's more of the administrative part of managing people versus the empowering and the motivating part of having a team of people reporting to you.
Yes, it is.
So I understand much better now when you talked about, we shouldn't talk about wellness program, but about wellness strategy, because you need to think of employee well-being in a holistic way. Again, it's not just those wellness programs in terms of, physical exercise or even financial classes, but it's also the way people relate to each other within the workplace, from the managers, directors, VPs, and above to the employees. It's everything, really. And that's why I think one of the reasons why, probably the main reason why wellness programs fail or actually don't provide all the benefits expected is because it's very, very siloed. It's very focused on one little piece of the entire picture.
Yes, it is. It is. And we're not necessarily focusing on what's most important first, right? Even we did. When I started our wellness program at SIG in 2007, I started with all I knew. I said, let's do a fitness challenge. Let's have an employee newsletter. Let's have a committee. And, we've grown from there. We still have a committee. We still have a newsletter. But it's become more of an integrated strategy. And, I think, actually, I had a conversation that I think relates to all of this about a year ago with Ryan Piccarella, who's the president of the Wellness Council of America. He's become a friend, and we were talking about the future of wellness. And he said very simply, I think the future of wellness is community. And I thought about that, and I said, I agree with that, because so many of our initiatives focus on blaming the individual for their bad behaviors. Even using the word bad or wrong or unhealthy is judgmental. And instead of, building community around shared interests or around shared goals or around our shared humanity with the goal of fostering connection. And that plays out. Actually, I was at the Health Benefits and Leadership Conference in Vegas in April, and one of the key things that came up was a discussion around loneliness. And I've been incorporating this into my work over the past year because I struggled with it personally growing up. And, I'm now seeing headlines in, things like the Boston Globe that say things like, the biggest threat to middle-aged men isn't obesity or smoking, it's loneliness. And we're not talking about that, but research, there was a journal called, it was the Perspectives on Psychological Science. I think it was in 2015. And they revealed that loneliness increases the risk of mortality by 45%, like more than excessive drinking, more than air pollution, more than other things we talk about. And so I would ask, anybody who's listening, what are you doing at your company to bring employees together, to learn more about each other, to serve together, to learn a new skill, to relax and have fun? Because human connection is one of the most overlooked but most essential elements of well-being.
Yes, and I like what you said earlier as well, that in any wellness initiative within an organization should start with talking to the employees and understand what's important to them. Because oftentimes, whether it's just a very simple, very tactical wellness initiative or more of a strategic initiative, it's often defined and designed by the top to the bottom. It's what the CEO or the executive team thinks is necessary for them to see the employees do versus what employees want and what's important to these employees. Yes.
And I guess a way of saying that I heard this was from the Wellness Council of America on one of the first webinars I was ever on with them. And it has stuck with me ever since. It's that wellness is something we do with and for people, not something we do to them.
Yes.
And that's most importantly, it's something we do with them, right? It's in collaboration with, it's in partnership with, it's in collaboration with. It's not something that is, we need to fix you. It's like, we want to support you. That's the shift.
So is there a specific investments or budgets that a company CEO should consider when starting implementing or even considering putting together a wellness initiative, a wellness strategy? How much does it cost?
Oh, that's a great question. If I knew the answer to that question, I'd have a lot of money. So
let me ask you this. Yeah. Not so much how much does it cost, but does it cost a lot to start a wellness initiative the right way?
That's a good question. Okay, I like that one. So I'd answer that a couple different ways. One, I would say it doesn't cost anything to ask your employees for their input.
Yes.
that is free. Doesn't cost anything necessarily to bring people together as a group to talk with each other and share shared struggles, what would make their life better. That doesn't cost anything. So I'd say, first of all, that definitely is something that anybody could do. But I would say it's going to cost money. I mean, I was in a situation recently where a company that it was a prospective employer of about 1,300 employees spread out across multiple locations. And they presented me with this challenge that is quite a challenge. They said, we want help creating a 3-year culture of health, as they were calling it, and we want it to be budget neutral. And I was like scratching my head because I'm like, okay, so help me understand. You want to be a billionaire by the time you're 70, but you're going to put a penny or not even, you're going to put no money into a 401k. I just don't. Again, I don't know how to do that. So I think what's really important is the first step is to cast the vision for, first of all, why are we doing this and what's our goal? Mm-hmm. So is our goal to be like one of the things I'm seeing as a shift and that when I work with organizations, I talk about is, look, our goal is not to be a healthy company because that can mean 50 different things to 50 different people. Our goal is to be an employer of choice. And so what does that look like? It means that people have opportunities to grow and to learn. It means that people have opportunities to connect in meaningful ways. It means people have opportunities to contribute in ways that make them feel like they're having an impact and making a difference. So I think one of the things organizations can do starting out, a couple different things, is to do some type of workplace engagement analysis. So whether that's through something like Quantum Workplace or this tool I have access to called the Thriving Workplace Culture Survey, or the Gallup, it's known as the Gallup Q12, which again looks at these kind of 12 different questions that focus on employee engagement and connection to work. I think starting out with something like that kind of, otherwise we're bowling without pins. So having that initial kind of data collection to say, where are we starting?
All right, so that leads me to this question then. Obviously, the key question is whether gains in employee engagements can be tied to a wellness strategy. Mm-hmm. So what metrics should organizations be thinking about even before starting a wellness or designing a wellness strategy, not only to measure mm-hmm. the success of the program or the initiative in terms of participation or even individual results, but also mm-hmm. the impact on the business itself? Because again, if a CEO is willing to spend money on a wellness initiative, it has to impact the performance of the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, tying back, I think we made the connection a little while ago between, the engagement and well-being based on a lot of Gallup's research. I think they have some of the most compelling research around that in terms of the connection to retention, recruitment, and performance, engagement, and morale. So I think one of the things we can look at is to go beyond just changes in, biometric screenings or clinical measurements. Let the clinicians do that and look at things like employee engagement and satisfaction scores. Look at metrics, like I said, like the Gallup Q12 and the results of best place to work surveys. Like if you're going to take one of those surveys, you can order a report that will show you where the gaps are, where you're misaligned as an organization between what employees want you to be like and what they perceive you to be like currently. I would say, turnover retention rates, employee referral rates for new hires. So are a lot of your new hires coming from internal referrals, or are they all coming from recruiters? Do people like your company enough to tell their friends to work there? This is something that's happened at my organization. We have almost everyone who comes to work for us knows somebody who works there already. Another popular metric that companies are starting to use as they're kind of tracking year to year are their Glassdoor ratings, because a lot of new employees, prospective employees, are looking for some type of external metric to say, is this company I'm looking to work for, highly regarded? Do they have a good reputation? That's mattering to people. So Glassdoor ratings, things like utilization of time off and volunteer benefits. So do people feel supported to take time for things that matter, like themselves and the community? I would look at things even like attendance at social or any type of group group-based events. Like, do people like to hang out with each other? That's a pretty clear indicator of whether or not you have a culture that people like to be at. So, does that help? Those are some initial things I think companies could consider.
And so, what would you suggest that a CEO look at when it comes to? I understand the metrics around employee engagements and recruiting efforts and referral programs, or these type of things, but even in terms of productivity, for instance, or sales performance, whatever it may be, what are some of the metrics that leaders may consider trying to connect the dots between what they're going to spend with a wellness initiative and how much are they going to get in return?
Honestly, that's a really tough question. I have to think about that a minute, because different organizations are set up differently. So whether it's a sales driven organization, that's going to be different than an organization that's predominantly a professional services firm, versus like a school system versus manufacturing. I really think, again, in these different surveys that I mentioned, like the Quantum, the workplace engagement survey, the Thriving Workplace Culture survey, they ask about each of the dimensions of well-being. So they ask about how supported someone feels. They feel like their manager cares for their health and well-being. Do they, would they recommend this as a place to work? Do they feel like they have opportunities to grow and learn? Because there's been, correlation found between, employees feel like they don't have opportunities to grow and the likelihood that they will leave the organization. So again, I think the metrics embedded in these types of tools really help employers get at whether or not what they are doing is effective. I don't think there's a clear cut to say, hey, look, if you put an initiative in place, you're going to save. If they were to look at cost, I would look at what is the cost to hire a new employee? Like, what is the total cost to hire a new person? And what would happen if you reinvested 10% of that into making sure that that person got what they needed from a training and development standpoint so that they would stick around? Like, that's a clear metric because companies don't look at that. They don't look at what the cost of hiring a new person is necessarily. What's the cost of losing somebody? If your turnover rate's 30%, that's expensive. It
is expensive, yes. Yeah, that's a good one. What organization what would the ideal workspace to allow a culture of wellness? Obviously the way office spaces are designed have a huge impact on how people are feeling about work. And how they collaborate or they actually don't collaborate together. So what are, in terms of office space, what are some of the key things that leaders should consider if they really want to create a culture of wellness within the organization?
So I like that question. I'm glad you mentioned it, because I know one of the things I've learned from, again, Rex Miller is that we spend 90% of our time in buildings. And so if we're not talking about the structures in which we spend most of our time, we're missing a significant opportunity to impact people kind of indirectly. So there's an organization called the Well Building Institute that I would recommend anyone wanting to learn more about this topic kind of dive into. And I would say a couple different things. The physical environment in terms of lighting and air quality, very, very important contributors. So there's lighting, for instance, that can support circadian rhythm so that when employees are in the workplace, the lighting is not disruptive to their sleep or concentration, but it kind of more so goes with how their body clock would normally go if they were exposed to sunlight. There's an organization I visited in Virginia. They have multiple locations, but I went to their Virginia location called DPR, and they have completely transformed their workplace in a variety of ways. So they, again, focused on lighting and air quality. They, from They have lots of living plants. So like living walls and having plants in the office contributes to emotional and physical well-being in a positive way. There's research behind that piece. And Lee Stringer's book, The Healthy Workplace, is another place I'd go to kind of dig deeper into the role of the environment on health. They can also put in place different physical changes. So, for instance, at our company, we have an oatmeal bar and a trail mix bar. So we have little canisters, and people can make their own oatmeal in the morning and put different toppings on it, or they can grab some trail mix or fresh popped popcorn that we just make with like coconut oil and sea salt. And it brings people together too. So it's multifunctional. It's not just, here's a healthy snack that has a lot of fiber in it. It's everyone stampedes to the lounge when the popcorn's popped. And things like, we use a company called Hungry Harvest that basically takes the ugly produce that would have otherwise been tossed, and they reduce food waste by having companies and individuals purchase that. So we have, fresh fruit available. We have a blender employees can use to make smoothies, and that's physical kind of stuff. And then in our office, we have a white noise machine that kind of can be heard in the background throughout our office so that, people can concentrate more easily. And I'd say, involve people in the design of the workplace if you're redesigning it, because a lot of employers, they put open offices in place, and there's been some research coming out to say that's maybe not the most effective thing to do because it can be highly distracting for people. So when we moved our office 2.5 years ago, our CEO asked our employees a lot of questions about what we wanted. And he was going to go with lower cubes because that's what the trend was. And a lot of the work that my colleagues do is involved in, very private work. And they, want some privacy. And so we have, higher cube walls. We have writable walls. We got to help influence the color scheme that was picked out. So those are just there's so many things. Those are just a few of the things companies can do.
Those are good ones. So we're getting close to the end of our conversation today. So let me ask you some fun questions before we conclude for the day. If you were to invite a historical figure or someone famous to dinner, who would you pick and why?
Okay. So anybody famous, or just does it have to be historical?
No, it can be a historical figure or someone famous.
Okay. So someone whose work has really influenced me in a positive way, whose writing I absolutely adore, who I just think speaks about something that's incredibly important about vulnerability and shame, is the author and professor Brené Brown. I just love her work, and I aspire to, kind of have the type of impact that she's having. And I think that her work on the importance of vulnerability and courage and being honest and real about where we are in our struggles and our journeys is critically important. So I would love to have dinner with her.
Okay. Any specific book on wellness that you would recommend to our listeners?
Oh my gosh, there are so many. The one I'll give you a list to put in the show notes, but the one that is, I would say, kind of I've gone back to again and again and again is the book Well-Being by Tom Rath and Jim Harter through Gallup, because that was one of the first books that I read that really captures the essence of these 5 elements and the science behind them, as well as some pretty compelling stories. So I think that's a really good starter book for someone just trying to grasp why this approach matters.
Okay. What is your favorite vacation spot?
So my family has always spent part of every summer since I was a little girl in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. My mom's from up there, and my parents now have a house in Wilmington, which is just outside of Lake Placid. And it is like a slice of heaven on earth for me. And I love to go up there and hike and just relax. And it is one of the most beautiful places on earth, I think.
Okay. What's your favorite food?
My favorite food. Okay, so I love food, so this is very hard for me. But I would say if I had to kind of narrow it down, I love all things curry. Like I love Indian food. So whether it's like a chana masala or curry roasted vegetables or curry in a salad dressing, like I just love all the flavors and dimensions of anything to do with curry.
Okay. So are you more of a meat or vegetable eater?
More of a I love veggies of just about any kind and just about any preparation. So.
Okay. What is your personal motto?
So as I kind of think about this, I would tie it back to the kind of the tagline I have for my blog, which is nourish your body, feed your soul, and shine your light. It's important to take care of our bodies and nourish it with food and rest and connection. And then, feeding our soul with community and truth and reflection, and then shining our light, like kind of doing what we're meant to do in the world and spreading kindness and caring in someone else's life, and kind of finding what makes our soul burn inside and focus on doing more of that, because that can be our contribution to the world.
That's a very good one. I love it.
Thanks.
All right. So what is the way for our listeners to follow you and us, SIG, on social media? So obviously you have your blog that we will share in the meeting notes, but anything else?
Yeah, I'd say connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, just under Rachel Druckenmiller. And then you can follow SIG. If you search Silberstein Insurance Group, SILBER, Stein Insurance Group on LinkedIn and Facebook, you can follow all of the initiatives that we're doing. And that's a really good way to also track to see where, I might be speaking as well, or any type of pieces that I've written. All of that will be on, SIG's social media platforms. So that's what I would say.
Great. And any last word of wisdom or advice?
So I would pull from somebody I met just this week, and his name is Matt Wyatt, and he does some of the training at the Barry Waymiller Leadership Institute that I referenced earlier. Mm-hmm. And he ended the training with these two words. He said, care more. And I'd say, care more about yourself and your body, care more about each other, about strangers, and about people that you do know. Care more about your work and the impact it can have, care more about the future and what you can do to transform it. And just, care more about noticing people, valuing people, and appreciating people, and be kind. Be kind. And it's always possible to be kind.
That's a great way to end our conversation. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and I hope that our conversation will kind of help nudge anyone who is listening to make this more of a priority at their organization.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.